Okay, first assignment is due in today, just in case anyone's been living under a rock for the last few weeks. I assume that everyone's doing okay with the work. I've moved my Sigma session down to ECM15, the Mac lab, because obviously most of my support work is either API stuff or smartphone stuff. The second assignment is starting now. I will get the assignment up tonight. I figured I got about 24 hours grace on you because you've got to finish off the first assignment. So the second assignment will be on by tonight once the first assignment's been handed in, okay? Because I want to do some last minute checks on that one because I'm not happy with a few of the bits of wording on there. Now, when's the second assignment in for? The second assignment, your last lecture for the second assignment is the first week back after Christmas. So the second assignment's due, I think it's about the 14th, 11th or 14th of January or something. So you've got Christmas to finish it off. Okay, so a bit more. It's a six. It's, no, would I do that to you? Probably. Okay. So the second assignment is going to be an extended test of your API because you're going to be building a web service client. You're going to be working with Jquery Mobile and you're going to be building a website which looks like a mobile web app. So it's going to have toolbars and navigation and back buttons and everything that a mobile web app has, but it's going to be built using HTML and JavaScript. So as you go through this, you're going to be testing your own API, right? Now it's really important that you think this through carefully. You're going to be testing your API, you're going to be making changes to your API because obviously it won't work the way you want it to work. But we're going to be marking your API based on the documentation you gave us when you handed the work in. So what's the answer? Make a copy. Make a copy of your web service. Remember we created a folder called V1.0 when we created our web service? There was a very good reason for that. Because you're now going to create another folder called V1.1. You're going to copy all your files over into that folder and then you can make as many changes as you want. As long as you don't mess too much with the database, because obviously it'll break the first version. That makes sense. So you're going to be refining and improving your API over this next sort of 6 weeks till January, but you mustn't change the one you submitted for your first assignment. Otherwise it will break when we try and test it and you'll get a low mark for it. So make sure you create a copy of that. Now when you do your labs this week and next week, your lab supervisor will be hammering this through to you. So the first thing you've got to do is make a copy of your web service. So that's the first thing you should do, either before the lab or during the lab, is make a copy of that, so you don't mess with your first version. So we're going to be using something called Jquery Mobile to build our client. Now, if you're doing 387 as well as this module, by the end of this year you will have 3 clients for your web service. You will have a mobile web app version, you'll have an iPhone version, and you'll have an Android version of your client. If you're just doing 305, then you will only be building this Jquery Mobile version of your website. But it's very important you do this because if you go for a job interview, you've got to demonstrate to the client what you've done, haven't you? Demonstrate to your potential employer. There's no point in cracking open API-G all the time and saying, look, isn't this cool? I can set my head, my body. Okay, they'll look at you very strangely. If you've got a proper client that works, it's going to look really impressive. So what we're going to talk about today is JavaScript, jQuery, and jQuery Mobile, because those are 3 non-identical but similar things, and they're related to each other. We're going to talk about CDNs, content distribution networks. In fact, Tom mentioned these last week, didn't he? He mentioned CDNs briefly in his talk last week. So that should be a little recap. We're going to look at how we build a jQuery mobile web page. We're going to look at buttons, links and transitions, customizing and theming. So we're going to cover the basic concepts of jQuery mobile. Now, your first lab task, the lab task for this week, this Wednesday or next Monday, is you've got to build a static mock-up of your client. or rather start building a static mockup. So you're going to build the pages with static content in, with the transition, so you can demonstrate it to a client to show them how it's going to work. Does that make sense? You're not pulling your data in, you're putting your data in Lab 3. You're simply building a mock-up with the navigation and the look and feel that you want for your client. So JavaScript is much maligned over the years, but JavaScript is the programming language which runs in the web browser. And because we're building a mobile web app, we've got to write our code in the web browser. So the only language we can use is JavaScript. Because your script, think about it, think what it's got to do. It's got to take the username and password, hasn't it? It's got to link it together. It's got to base64 encode your username and password. It's got to send a request to the server, hasn't it? It's got to pull the JSON data back in again. It's got to open up the data. It's got to read the data in. It's got to do sensible things with it. It's got to update the pages. And we're going to write all of this using JavaScript. And JavaScript is one of those languages which is really important that you learn. It's one of the key languages for programmers. And we insert our JavaScript into HTML pages, and that's how we run our code. So, syntax for JavaScript is really simple and straightforward. Okay? If you've ever used C++ or Java or PHP, which you've used now, the syntax is not dissimilar to those, with the curly braces and the semicolons. Okay? And we're going to be using some libraries to help us. If you're really worried about JavaScript, we're not going to use it for 2 weeks. So it gives you 2 weeks to get your head around the concepts of JavaScript before we dive in to do the work. So a good starting point would be W3 Schools, which gives you the basic JavaScript introduction. But you've got 2 weeks notice that we're going to be working with JavaScript. So make sure you're at least comfortable with the basics of it before we start. Okay, on top of JavaScript, so that's our language, we're going to use a framework called Jquery. And Jquery is a really, really powerful framework. It automates and simplifies a lot of the activities you need to do. So if you need to change some content, some HTML content, you can grab the HTML content and make changes really quickly using Jquery. There's some really good selectors in there to make it easy. Who's familiar with CSS? Style sheets? Yeah? I hope most of you are, because you did it last year with me. CSS, you know how you've got these selectors, the H to select the H1s, heading 1s, you've got the hovers and all the rest of it, and the selectors in Jquery are identical. So if you want to grab part of your page to modify it, as long as you know the CSS syntax to grab the part of the page, you can do it. Okay, so again, if you refresh your memory on CSS, that will be helpful. And what it does, it takes the most common things that you do as part of your scripting and automates them. It adds libraries and classes and frameworks to allow you to simplify and to make things much easier for you. And we're going to use it a lot for things like Ajax Calls, which is a fancy way of saying working with web services, and DOM manipulation, which is a fancy way of saying messing with the HTML, making changes to it. Because if you pull a list of your reviews out, you need to insert those into your page, don't you? And to insert them into your page, you're going to have to add maybe either table rows, aren't you, to store the values, or bullet items. You're going to be inserting HTML into your page using JavaScript. So that's called DOM manipulation, document object model. And the great thing about Jquery is there's loads and loads of plugins. So you can hunt around for bits of code that will help you with your assignment and just plug them in and use them. Just include them in your HTML head file, and you can use plugins for Jquery. Jquery is used by a couple of startups. So this is a few off the top of my head. Google uses Jquery for its search results. You know that thing that pops down as you start typing and the results appear? That's done with Jquery. IBM, WebSphere, which is their big package of building web apps and so on, they use Jquery as the underlying language for that, the underlying framework. And Netflix, their streaming system, uses Jquery. There's hundreds of them. They're the logos I could find. So now we've got JavaScript and we've got jQuery, haven't we, sitting on top as a JavaScript framework. jQuery Mobile is the next layer on top. So we've got a series of layers of code and framework we can use. So what's really cool about jQuery Mobile is used to build user-friendly mobile web apps. So you know when you go to a web page on your phone, you've got tiny links and you have to zoom in to see what you're doing. If you compare that to some web pages and smartphone apps, so you've got big buttons, you've got drop downs, haven't you? You've got push navigation, animations between pages. That's done with jQuery Mobile. And it does most of the work for you. It's been developed open source, and Adobe, Nokia, BlackBerry, they've all contributed to it. Money or funds or developers to this project. It's huge. And there's a special plugin for it called Phonegap. Have you come across Phonegap? You can take your jQuery mobile site and turn it into a native app using Phonegap. So once you've worked out how to build your apps, the last session we do, this will be after Christmas, will focus on Phonegap. So I'll show you how you turn a website into a native app and the pitfalls and the benefits of doing that. So we're going to cover quite a bit, as I tend to do. Okay, so it's HTML5 based, works on jQuery, and there's a nice gallery of lots of sites which use it. And because they're built using web technologies, you can just click on links and play with the apps because they're just written using HTML. There's a few simple apps built using jQuery Mobile. And you can see, first of all, I haven't updated the images this year for iOS 7. That's the first thing you can see. And can you see you've got nice chunky buttons, you've got table views if you're used to iPhone development, that style. And you've got, it looks like a native app, doesn't it? It's an Android app or an iPhone app. It's got its own slight distinct style, but behind the scenes, it's still sitting inside the web browser. And the clever thing is, have you bookmarked pages on your phone before? You know, you can get nice icons that go on your home screen. I'll show you how to do that. And when you launch it from the icon, it gets rid of all this edge to it, gets rid of all the back buttons and so on, and you're left with a full screen, what looks like a native app running on your phone. So that's the hype. We are going to have to include some libraries, aren't we? Specifically, we're going to have to include 3 libraries. We're going to have to include the jQuery library, which gives us our core functionality. We're going to have to include the jQuery Mobile library, and they're both JavaScript libraries. But also, we need a style sheet, don't we? We've got to import a style sheet to give us that nice look and feel of our website. So we're going to have to import 3 libraries into our pages. And what we could do, you could go to the jQuery mobile site, you could click on download, you download the zip file, you could unpack the zip file, you could put those 3 files on your server, and you could link to those 3 files. That's what you normally do, isn't it, with libraries? You download them and link them locally. But we've got a problem. There's always new versions coming out. So it's very quickly we become out of date. Within a month, we're going to have to download the next set of libraries and replace them and change them over. And they're quite big libraries. We can compress them and make them smaller, but it means every time a visitor comes to your website for the first time, they're going to have to download 2 huge JavaScript files into their browser cache and a quite substantial CSS file, which means the first page they hit on your site is going to be slow. You see why, can't you? You've got to download all this stuff before it works. And the other problem is it's nicking your bandwidth. You can only download a certain number of files, can't you, at any one time? So if someone clicks to browse a page, it'll download the HTML, the images, the CSS, the JavaScript, and the browser will only download 2 pages, generally, from the same domain at the same time. So it has to wait for those to download, then go back and download some more files. What we're going to do, we're going to use a copy hosted elsewhere on the internet. We're going to point our links to someone else's website. And by doing that, it means that when someone accesses your page, the chances are they've already used a site that uses jQuery and jQuery Mobile. The chances are high, aren't they? They've already hit a site, which means they've already downloaded those 3 files into their browser cache, and it will just reuse the same 3 files they used for the other sites. And the other clever thing about this is you can specify the version to lots of detail or to no detail at all. You can simply say, download the latest version of the libraries, and it will always use the latest version for you. So here is the page, and let's have a look. This is the header section of our page. Now if we look at it, let's look at the structure. Obviously title, that is the title that will get bookmarked if someone puts it on their home page. That's the title that appears under the icon on the home page. So obviously make sure that title doesn't say my page. The viewport is really important. You know you've got your pinch and zoom to zoom in on web pages. Well, if it's already optimized for the smartphone, you want to disable that, don't you? So they can't pinch and zoom. Otherwise it will just wreck the whole page layout. So we have width, device width, which means it automatically sets the width of the page to match the width of the device. Initial scale 1, because we don't want to zoom in, because we've already got chunky buttons, haven't we? A nice big text. So it's perfect the way it is. And the important bit is that bit at the end. User scalable, no. And that disables the pinch and zoom on the smartphone screen, because they'll make a mess. If they start zooming in, it's already designed for the screen, it's going to look really weird. Okay, so then we've got the style sheet, and you can see on that one I've specified version 1.2.0, and that min, anyone know what that means? Okay, it's short for minified. What does minified mean? There's 2 versions of that CSS file, one that has the word min in and one that doesn't. The one that doesn't have the word min in has new line characters in the JavaScript file. It has tabs to indent the code. It has nice big variable names. It has loads of comments in there so you can see how it works. The min version gets rid of all the white space. So it's one long line in the CSS file. It gets rid of all the comments in the CSS file. It gets rid of it replaces long variable names with short variable names. Why is it doing this? What's it trying to do? Saving bandwidth. It's trying to reduce the file size as much as possible to make it quicker to download. So if you're doing development and you might want to change the CSS, you want to work with the non-minified version. For release of your client, you want to use the minified version because that's much smaller. So can you see I've color coded to show where the files are coming from? The website is code.jquery.com. So every time someone accesses your page, it downloads the libraries from jquery.com, not from your local server. So there's my jQuery library, look. There's my JavaScript library for jQuery. And there's my JavaScript library for jQuery Mobile. Notice how the style sheet and the jQuery Mobile have to have the same version. But jQuery, because it's the underlying library, which is used for other purposes, that's on a slightly higher version, can you see? What you should do, though, is find the latest version. Since I've done this, there's been new versions coming out. So basically, you're going to create an HTML page with something similar to that in the head. And that's your starting point. Now, I've talked about that. Here's the body. We've got a bad case of dividers going on, haven't we? Too many divs going on. But let's have a look at this. The key here are these divs. There's my page div. And I've got 3 divs inside the page. I've got div data role equals header, div data role equals content, div data role equals footer. That's the head, the body, and the footer. Think about your Android apps and your iPhone apps. You've got the bar at the top, haven't you? That's your header. You've got your bar at the bottom, your toolbar, if you like. That's your footer, or your tabs, and then your content in the middle. I put those little comments in there to remind me which closing divs go with which, because it can get very confusing. That's it. That's all you have to do. And this data-role tells the jQuery library, jQuery Mobile library, to render that as a banner, as a bar at the top of the screen. That's all you have to do. That produces a perfectly formatted mobile web app page, obviously with a very little content. So can you see how that works? There's lots of other attributes. Data position fixed, that's going to make sure it sticks to the top of the screen like it should, like a good nav bar should. Data position fixed. Data role footer, that tells it it goes to the bottom of the page. I put an ID on this one, look, data ID, so I can attach stuff to it. And theme, you can generate as many themes as you want. You can have 26 themes, in fact, letters A to Z, and that's the colour scheme for the footer. So this will give me a different coloured footer from the header. Now, the problem we have, you notice a lot of this data underscored in your data dash, didn't you, for these attributes, which you probably never come across before. If you put a non-existent attribute in an HTML tag, it's going to blow up. It won't validate. But HTML5 has a very important rule, and that rule is if you've got the word data dash in front of the attribute, don't worry about validation, ignore it. So what Jquery Mobile does, it inserts these special attributes to help it understand the page structure and puts data dash in front of them so the validation tool will ignore the attributes. So data dash, everything is data dash all the way through this. Okay, so basically if the attribute begins with data dash, it gets ignored by the parser. The HTML5 renderer just simply ignores it. It doesn't throw a wobbly, it doesn't throw an error, it just ignores it. And that's exactly what we want because it's only important to the Jquery Mobile library. So, what I've shown you so far is a nice, simple HTML5 Jquery Mobile page template. And your page is always going to start like that. So what I would do is I would save that as a template somewhere. That makes sense, wouldn't it? Create the page, test it, and then save it as a page template so you can just keep making copies of it. Because they'll always have the same structure. We're now going to look at some of the controls. Lots of different controls. What Jquery Mobile does, it takes standard HTML controls and finger-friendlies them. So for example, a hyperlink becomes a button. A bulleted list becomes a table view, a list view on the screen. And you'll see this all the time. So, for example, here we are, look. There's a hyperlink. If I put data role equals button, that tells Jquery Mobile to turn it into a nice friendly, a nice chunky button, which the users can interact with. So that code becomes that button. See how easy this is to build complex pages. Lists. There's a list. Look. So if you're doing smartphone development or used an Android or an iPhone, you'll recognise that sort of list design. Data role equals list view. As soon as you put data role equals list view in, it turns that bulleted list into a nice finger-friendly list view, which you can interact with. And you see those little arrows at the end, little circles with arrows in? It's put those in because inside the list items we've got hyperlinks, just like you would have with a phone app. So it allows you to drill down. There's loads and loads of controls. What I would do is use this page. This is the control sampler page on Jquery Mobile. And what you do is you drill down to the bit you want, and there's a little button next to each example which says show source. And it pops up the HTML to do that particular control. So you can very quickly build up your website by using the Jquery Mobile controls. Now, this is where it gets a little bit weird. If you're working on a smartphone, you want to download all the content up front, don't you? Because you can't guarantee when someone's navigating your website, they're going to have a connection. So traditionally, when you had a web page and you went to another web page, you clicked on the link and it downloaded a second page. Yeah, so every page you saw was a different HTML document. Doesn't work that way with jQuery Mobile. You create all your pages in the same HTML document. So it's going to be a very big document, so get used to collapsing sections down in your editor as you're working. So you're going to have one humongously huge HTML document. And when the person accesses your page for the first time, it will download this document, and every time they go to a different page, it simply loads a different part of the document into the browser. So it's all there up front, you're just loading different parts. And each page has its own div, and each div has to be unique. So you identify the page you want to load by the ID attribute of the page div, and I'll show you an example in a minute. And you also want to be able to add back buttons, don't you, to take you back to the first page. There you are. There's 2 pages in jQuery Mobile. I've taken out the inner divs to make it so it fits on the screen. ID equals home, ID equals page 2. So when you create a link between the pages, you tell it to go to a particular ID. So it's just like, you know how you have these pages where you can jump to different sections on the page, up and down? Right. Same idea, but instead of it scrolling down to the page, it animates to the next div. So it looks like an animation. You've got these progress bars, the spinning progress bars. You've got a nice animation between the pages. And we use the ID tag to link the different pages together, this sort of pseudo pages. There we are. So if I want a button that takes me to my second page, I simply put ahref equals hash page 2, because hash is the CSS for div for ID, isn't it? So this says, take me to ID of page 2, and that will then animate nicely to the second page. So it's very quick. Okay, is it still recording? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so to link to a different page, you specify the ID in the href attribute, and that will jump you through to the second page. If you want a nice fade or different transition to the page, or a slide up, a slide across, a dissolve between the pages, you simply use data-transition on the hyperlink. And there's about 10 different animations you can choose from. So you can build beautiful interfaces with nice transitions that look just like native apps, simply by plugging in HTML tags and putting the right attributes. I would recommend that between now and your lab, and for now and next week, you have a look at lots of examples and start to play around with jQuery Mobile. If you want a theme to your website, you want to change the colour scheme, there's a lovely page which is jquerymobile.com/theme-roller, and it allows you to visually design new colour schemes for your app. You design the themes using Theme Roller. When you finish designing it, you download the file and simply link the file in your header of your page. And then you can use the theme. So you can see here, for example, I've got theme A and theme B. Can you see those very faintly in the background? I can add 26 different themes. And each one can have different colours and gradients. And you can mix and match once you've got them in there. So Theme Roller, very useful. Very useful tool. And you can also, as I mentioned earlier, create a custom homepage icon. So when someone bookmarks your page, it looks like a native app. You've got a nice icon on the home screen, you've got the title underneath it, and when you launch it from there, it launches into a full screen app. All you have to do is create a 120 pixel PNG icon. Simple as that. Give it a name like icon.png, and in your head section, you simply put a link to the icon. Link rel equals Apple Touch icon. Don't worry too much about the Apple. Apple were the first people to do it. Android just kind of nicked the same header. It works for iPhone and Android. And you simply put that link in your head of your HTML document, and if someone tries to bookmark your page, they get the nice custom icon instead of the standard sort of thumbnail view of the page. Okay, I've been very short today, too short possibly. Okay, there's lots of useful books on Jquery Mobile. That's the one I've used. There's probably newer ones than that because that's going back a few years. There's lots of online resources. Your best resource for doing Jquery Mobile is going to be the Jquery Mobile website, because you can literally copy and paste code snippets from there, paste them into your page and use them immediately. So your first assignment is due in tonight, 11:55. I get that out of the way first. I will put the assignment brief on for the second assignment some point later this afternoon. But your first task is going to be to build a static version of your client. So the logic behind this is, if you're working for a client and developing an app for them, you want to design the look and feel first and the interactions before you go to the trouble of linking to the API. So it gives you 2 weeks to get your head around Jquery Mobile. Next week we're going to talk about more advanced controls and forms and some of the gotchas, if you like, for working with this. The third week we're going to start pulling data from your web service API into this page. So as you're doing this, think about how you're using the web service. So as you build your static pages, if you've got a static page with lots of categories in, then you think, oh, have I got an API call that will give me that data for that page? If my categories are in alphabetical order, oh, does my resource give me that information in alphabetical order? So you're going to be spending 2 weeks building this static website, but also making some quick changes to your web service to make sure that when you do come around to building your client properly with the JavaScript libraries, you're not fumbling around making changes to your web service at that point. So do you understand what I'm saying? I'm giving you 2 weeks of grace, okay, to get your head around the next assignment and to start building the static pages and get your head around Jquery Mobile. Okay, are there any questions about that? Or are we just so absolutely knackered from working on the assignments that we're still recovering? Okay, so my Sigma session today is 10 till 12. It's about 11:30 actually, because I've got to pop out at 11:30 today. I'll be in ECM 15 if you need help with the assignment. So thank you very much. This register should be somewhere. Make sure you sign in. Thanks very much.